Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 142 for the National Land Podcast. Before we jump in, I want to give an announcement and a disclaimer. So today is a super cool episode. We are talking with the agricultural policy editor for Progressive Farmer magazine, or Progressive Farmer. It's not just a magazine, it's an online outlet as well. We're talking with Chris Clayton. And by nature of the conversations that we are having, these get political. There's no way around it. I worked very, very hard in hosting this podcast on not bringing in politics because it's so easy to do. We work in land, rural land, and agricultural and hunting. It's impossible to avoid politics on some level, but I try not to, just so we can remain objective and so that everybody learns something. When things get political, people stop learning because they shut off. And I try to keep that in there. Today, we get into politics, and it's unavoidable because we are talking about policy. Now, the reason I mention that is if you have input on it, throw us your input. Send us questions. Check out our social media page for when we post this podcast. Give us your take. Let us know what you think of the podcast. We keep things as objective as possible on here. That's my disclaimer. That's all I'm throwing out there. But again, we're talking with Progressive Farmer. This is one of the biggest names in agriculture, and we get to talk to one of their editors, their agricultural policy editor, Chris Clayton. This is a super cool opportunity for us. I'm stoked about it. The other thing that I have to do is I said I had an announcement. We've had my digital specialist, Liv Winstead, and our content specialist, Bryce Berglund, have both been helping build this podcast with me and the rest of our team. And they have done such a remarkable job finding guests to be on this podcast. And it's been like, this is just a true example of the progress that we've made. I think we started out, I think I was darn near by myself just talking at the screen. No, I would con agents and say I would send them hats and stuff if they would come onto the podcast. And now we're getting really neat guests and our wonderful, knowledgeable agents on this podcast to give information to landowners throughout the United States or people interested in land. So that's my announcement. I know it's a little long-winded, but I just wanted to make sure I said it. So today we're talking about FSA restrictions, loan cap amounts being reviewed by DOGE. We are talking about tariffs. We're talking about the big, beautiful bill, and we're talking about the farm bill. We are covering a lot of ground. So please sit back and enjoy. All right. Well, I actually thought there was going to be another button there. I clicked it. It fired up the record right away. So welcome to the National Land Realty Podcast. I'm here with Chris Clayton, and Chris Clayton is the ag policy editor for Progressive Farmer magazine. And I'm pretty stoked to be talking to you, Chris. Your publication is at the heart of news in the ag sector. And I think I can't think of anybody who doesn't know about Progressive Farmer. Tell me just a little bit, like, how did you get to Progressive Farmer, and tell me kind of your career journey.
Well, it's interesting. Our parent company is DTN, which used to be Data Transmission Network, and so I was a reporter for the Omaha World Herald, and was pretty excited to work for the World Herald. Agriculture, though, was probably, one of the bottom things on the list of topics I really would have wanted to cover. I wanted to cover mainly politics and general news for the Omaha World Herald, but I kind of accidentally became the World Herald's agriculture reporter. You live in Omaha, you live in Nebraska and Iowa, you're going to cover agriculture one way or another. But I kind of fell into this cattle fraud case about 25 years ago, and broke the story about this big cattle fraud case. And next thing I know, I'm the agriculture reporter. Well, DTN is based in Omaha, Nebraska, and I didn't know much about DTN at all. I didn't really pay attention to what you would call trade press too much. But the DTN started off providing grain prices to farmers. So you could look within like a 50 or 100 mile radius of where you lived and you could see whether the grain elevator 40 miles away was offering a much better price than your local grain elevator, for instance. And so with that satellite system, then they built in weather and they built in market information, and then they decided to build a newsroom. And they hired an editor from the Wall Street Journal to come to Omaha to build this newsroom. And I just was very interested in the idea that why would this guy leave a job? He was actually like the Tokyo editor for the Wall Street Journal, and why would you leave that job to come work for this little company in Omaha, Nebraska? So I ended up deciding to go ahead and take that leap and move over, and in 2005, so it's been 20 years now, to work for DTN. And then DTN bought Progressive Farmer magazine from Time Warner about maybe 2 years later. So DTN and Progressive Farmer have been one company since maybe 2007. That's the kind of the long story of all that. So
Well, no, and so your position and your title is to be on top of all current events that involve agriculture, basically, right? Like that's kind of your area is, and sort of tell me what that involves, and tell me how you keep on top of things.
yeah, and I primarily focus on policy, but I tend to find myself in the middle of all kinds of breaking news as it is. But I focus more on farm programs and U.S. Department of Agriculture. Um, what kind of legislation is dealing with farmers? The renewable fuel standard, which is obviously in the Midwest when we have such a big biofuel industry, and that was really when I came to DTN was when the first renewable fuel standard was passed, and we kind of grew as all of this development of the biofuels industry was developed across the Midwest. And so, whatever is kind of going on is breaking it. And we want to look at things, is it something that might affect the markets in some way? Whether it's weather or a you shut down a Tyson packing plant for a day because of a fire or something like that, it affects cattle prices tremendously. All kinds of things like that that kind of get in the way. Now obviously we're dealing a lot with trade. What's going on with markets for things like soybeans that rely so heavily on markets such as China, and what's going on there. And when Donald Trump is president, things happen almost daily that affect agriculture in one way or another. You know, right now it is immigration raids, and the president saying we need to protect our farmers and from this and the impacts it has on the food supply, but the Department of Homeland Security continuing to go out and raid agricultural businesses. There's kind of there's been definitely a mixed message going on there, but there's just so many different things that you figure out policy wise that directly affect agricultural markets.
Well, and let's kind of dive in a little bit to that. And just because of your experience and how well tapped in you are to current events, I kind of want to just dabble and go down all kinds of rabbit holes with you. But originally when we talked about there's a new policy with FSA loans that any loan above $400,000 in the agricultural market, I mean, it has to be FSA, but any loan above $400,000 has to go through DOGE inquiry or DOGE investigation to go through. And I wanted to kind of ask you a little bit, what's sort of going on with that, and what is sort of the policy and drive behind that, and what's the effect of that?
You know, Part of the problem with that is that USDA and DOGE have been very kind of secretive about sharing information regarding what exactly USDA provides to DOGE. But this came out back in early May when basically they said that all of these FSA loans were going to have to now go through approval process from the Agriculture Secretary and DOGE. And so it was like $500,000 for loans, but it was also loans that go to not individuals, but entities. Well, most farms are structured now as LLCs. Even maybe some of the smallest farms are structured as LLCs. So that's pretty much a big chunk. And I think when I did the math and was looking at different things, I think I calculated that roughly more than a third of USDA farm loans would have to go through this kind of process. Um, but USDA has been kind of quiet about that since then. They're not releasing much information. I think essentially it's going to take things like maybe a freedom of information request to find out what exactly the procedures are here. And I think what I've been surprised about is that Secretary Brooke Rollins has testified a couple times before Congress, and nobody from Congress has really directly asked her what's going on with this situation. So I've been kind of surprised about that. Before Elon Musk left DOGE, there was also the discussion, this idea of building this large database of all government payments to people, um, and accumulating that. So we don't know how much other farmer data has been shared with DOGE beyond farm loans. If you are requiring that everybody who has a contract or everybody who is receiving government payments, all of that information has to go into this so-called super database now. Well, that's every farm payment, whether it's commodity payment, conservation payment, every farm in some way, shape, or form, almost every farm has some sort of relationship with USDA where they are receiving some sort of payment in some way, whether it's a grant or a disaster loan, whatever. Um, and there's been less and less information about how much information, what exactly is going on with this database thing. So it's a problem right now trying to extract some information out on what exactly is the relationship between the Department of Agriculture and DOGE. Has that continued since Elon Musk left? Before Elon Musk left, Brooke, the Agriculture Secretary, was very supportive of DOGE and Elon Musk. Since he left, I don't think she's mentioned his name or anything about him since then. So it's very much an up in the air situation of, are we still seeing this effort go forward? It would be great if we could pull a little more information out of USDA. But it seems like not just with this administration, but with every administration, it becomes harder and harder to get more information out from departments on just what exactly they're doing with government, with people's records.
And do we know sort of what the requirement was up front? I mean, this is a gatekeep to give loans, right? Like fundamentally, it's to check on loans. But do we know what the requirements were going in? Like why DOGE is looking into? I mean, you mentioned there's not a lot of transparency, but a was there any kind of reason given, or was it just that DOGE is going to be investigating any loan above $400,000, a blanket statement, and then we move on?
Yeah, that was very unclear of
Okay.
what prompted that. I mean, actually, FSA loans have a fairly low rate of failure in the grand scheme of things, given that FSA is generally considered the lender of last resort for farmers, and most of what they do is actually guarantee loans for the banks. If a bank is offering a loan to a beginning farmer, the bank might want, USDA guarantee to sign off on that, and that just kind of gives them a little more security. And then they do direct loans. They've done more direct loans in recent years because of maybe some struggles that farmers have had. But in the grand scheme of things, there's not a very high default rate for those loans. So it's not like there was a whole bunch of so-called waste, fraud, and abuse through the USDA loan process.
Is there any indication? Because part of me wonders, just going off of the talking heads and talking points that have been in the news, say over the last 5 to 10 years, one of the big stories is foreign land ownership. There's been a lot of eyeballs on foreign land ownership as it pertains to China land holdings. And I mean, is there any indication that that's part of this? Because I could imagine that being sort of part of the discussion on this.
There hasn't really, they've never really made that connection, whether that was part of it at all. And a lot of that foreign land ownership, most of it is tied to different companies. Smithfield Foods, of course. Now, Smithfield Foods is owned by a Chinese company, and when that happened, there were a lot of land holdings in Virginia and North Carolina and Missouri and a few other states that all suddenly became Chinese-owned land, for instance, because of that sale of Smithfield. Syngenta is now owned by a company called Kim China, and that kind of same thing happened. Syngenta got in trouble down in Arkansas because a um, a testing facility, a research facility they've had down there that's gone under three or four different ownerships. When it came under now Syngenta being owned by China, the state basically cited them with a violation of law because they didn't file the certain paperwork with the state of Arkansas. So a lot of that has come out primarily because of company sales, but that doesn't really get discussed a whole lot.
And that's sort of one of the ways that foreign land ownership has sort of been attempted to be hidden, as far as sales and acquisitions, is nestled under American-based companies, and then that company is in turn owned by a foreign government.
Yeah.
And it's that's to as I'm looking at it, that could be, if I was examining sort of the hot points that have been discussed, is that maybe they're looking at something like that, or but the key is we just don't know, right?
No, not exactly. And this became a real hot button a couple of years ago up in North Dakota when a company from China wanted to build a corn processing facility about 12 or 13 miles from the Air Force Base there. And that's kind of that was one of those real highlight points where suddenly this whole debate over Chinese owned land really flared up. But we've had, like, for instance, Syngenta has a facility not far from the Air Force Base over in Nebraska. And that issue is really not brought up that much. So it's an interesting thing how the foreign land ownership kind of sparks a lot and just kind of fires up every now and then.
Yeah, it does seem to, and like we've kind of gone through our own little investigations internally on like how much, and because of the China conversation, and there's been the conversation about Bill Gates and everything, and when you look at foreign land holdings, the impact of China and its land holdings is fairly small compared to other countries. It's really not a blip on the radar, but the thing that's been sort of pointed out is the location of those holdings.
Yeah,
Are they near government facilities? Are they near, Air Force, your example, Air Force bases? There are smaller parcels of land that are near those locations, and that's sort of what they're keeping an eye on. I could imagine that being the case with this, but it does seem like a bottleneck as far as loan acquisition to American farmers. Do we know of, is there any indication of an increase in loan denials in FSA loans, or longer term negotiations before they get loans? Are there more hoops to jump through now? Is there any kind of feedback on that?
Well, that's part of the problem with that was that when right after inauguration, basically USDA froze a lot of things. So just immediately, without the whole DOGE thing really directly affecting USDA, they just kind of stopped basically approving a bunch of things, and FSA loans were one of them. Um, and there probably were instances where a farmer was waiting on a piece of land and waiting for this loan to come through to finalize a sale. But I think that's probably been relatively small, because in the grand scheme of things, FSA probably gives out about $7-8 billion in loans a year, which in the grand scheme of agriculture is not a lot. But they do also, they're dealing more with high risk farmers. They're dealing a lot more with beginning farmers, and part of that is also, you can get a little bit lower interest rate if you're a veteran, and you go through, an FSA loan process, those sort of things. But we haven't heard a lot of complaints directly from farmers about that, and even the farm organizations are pretty good about sounding alarms if they think there's a problem. And so that really hasn't come up a whole lot, I guess.
I want to kind of steer the conversation towards current events because that's kind of where you live and policy. There's a few hot button topics that are circulating right now. And I had the privilege, I hadn't checked through it yet. Here in the last couple of days, I started browsing your X account and you're kind of an X ninja. You've got a lot of posts on there on current events and staying up to speed on things with a wealth of information. And do you mind if I throw your X handle out there? I feel like a
Oh
lot of
no,
people should be
please go
following
ahead.
you. So Chris Clayton DTN is his handle on I always want to say Twitter.
Yeah, I'm the same. Yeah.
On it's going to be one of those things that identifies older people as they move along. Like it's gonna be like, you're one of those. But on X, go ahead. Anybody out there that's interested in any kind of ag policy, follow Chris's account there. He's very good at keeping everybody up to date. But hot button topics are right now immigration and for one, and tariffs. And I would argue is the farm bill as well, or a lack of a farm bill, and the elements of the farm bill that have been tied up into the big beautiful bill. And I wanted to kind of get your quick takes on where we stand right now on immigration, because you just mentioned at first we were looking at full immigration reform. Anybody who is not a legal resident is being deported. And then it was recognized here a few weeks ago. And as you said, policies are shifting nightly. And it was recognized that those policies were directly impacting the hotel industry and impacting the agricultural industry. And right now, there's been verbal communications or written communications that there's going to be an easement, like I'm using land language, there's going to be an easement on policy for immigration and deportations when it comes to agricultural industry and the hotel industry. What's happening right now in that sort of part of the world?
There's a lot of confusion, basically, and a
I'm
lot of
I'm hearing a theme here.
and a lot of scared people.
Yeah.
You know, we went through a stretch in early June, where you had some dairies being raided in places like states like New Mexico. You had farm raids in particularly in California, in the Central Valley of California, and just here in Omaha, we had a small meat processor that was raided last week. I was there basically in the aftermath of that. By the time I found out exactly where it was and everything else, I went over there and it was just finishing, pretty much wrapping up as I got there. But so you've had a few instances of ice raids in agriculture, and the president, going back to April, had made a point of saying, we need to protect the farmers, and we need to make sure that we find a way. And he suggested, you know, finding a way to ensure that these workers are legal. But nothing has actually happened in terms of actual, um, written direct order. There's no executive order from the president saying that, agencies should be figuring out how to work with agriculture on this. The legislation has not, there's been legislation on this forever and a day because it's been a long-standing problem with agriculture. It's a huge issue for farmers. Um, as they have ramped up, 15 years ago when nobody seemed to focus a whole lot on undocumented workers, most farms were undocumented workers. Now, if you go through the visa program, the H-2A program, well, you can be paying $25 an hour for people to pick your tomatoes. I mean, H-2A, it's a very expensive process. So it's a very complex thing that agriculture has been trying for 2 decades to get some sort of reforms on agricultural labor. And now in the last couple of weeks, all of this has kind of blown up because you're going out in California and you're raiding the farms where people are picking lettuce or blueberries or whatever else. Hey, those vegetables and fruit are going to spoil waiting for somebody to harvest them. And then we're going to be getting more basically cheap imported fruits and vegetables from Mexico. And then we're going to complain about the trade balance because we're getting more of our food coming from other countries. And it's just kind of this vicious cycle of situations.
Yeah,
Um,
and well, I was going to say, so if I'm hearing you right, so what we're talking about is we are we are interrupting the production in domestic agriculture and causing a shortfall in labor, and you could have product declines in terms of amount, and all of which, and having to go through more hoops to hire domestic labor, that's going to drive up the price of our commodities. And then we're tariffing imported commodities. Those are going to be of a higher price. And they're in a normal situation, you could have an offset, right, where you're tariffing imports, and those imports become more expensive, so domestic purchases become higher or of a higher value to trade even. But those are also going up in price. So you have both sides are increasing. And so what in the end, what you're looking at is probably not an increase in domestic production and demand and a price increase to the consumer is kind of what I'm hearing, right?
yeah, exactly. And at the moment, it hasn't had a situation where it has like affected cattle prices or hog prices.
Right, which are still pretty high.
Which are still pretty high. But if you go and ICE decides that they're going to raid a large packing plant in Kansas or Nebraska or Texas, because there are some packing plants out there that literally one packing plant might account for 5 or 6% of your daily meat processing. If you hit one of those packing plants, live cattle prices will take a big drop quickly. And then, I think then suddenly you have this sort of come to Jesus moment when the Nebraska National Cattlemen's Association is getting upset because these raids have suddenly now affected live cattle prices. We haven't had that yet, but if ICE touches that third rail, so to speak, it will become a very big deal very quickly when you are affecting uh, hog and beef prices. So we'll see what happens there. But I mean, we found out during COVID that I mean, there are some packing plants that were having really struggles with worker safety and health during COVID. We found out some packing plants literally have over 20 languages spoken. That just shows you how many different kinds of immigrants are there. And when you have ICE pulling people who we know are undocumented, but they're also pulling people who have papers in different senses, who are waiting for maybe, a final sign off on them or whatever, but they have work authorizations and they're taking those people as well. I was on a call yesterday where, a couple of people who spoke said, now you have towns and cities where basically people are not going out doing anything because they are afraid. People aren't showing up for work. It is affecting restaurants in Texas because not only do they probably rely on immigrant workers, but there aren't people coming into the restaurant who might otherwise be doing it. So it's created quite a ripple effect when it comes to agriculture and food.
And we've kind of gotten ourselves into a pickle when it comes to that, the entire equation, right? Because illegal like undocumented, we'll call it undocumented, but it's, essentially being here
Yeah.
illegally. Undocumented workforce has become such a part of our economy for so long that the infrastructure is built around it. So just running in and blowing the whole thing up is having this ripple effect, as it like it's kind of a whipsaw approach where the economics of these industries don't have time to adjust, and then there's a consumer side that doesn't have time to adjust either, where what you're going to see is shutdowns and mass price increases and inefficiencies throughout the entire thing, because it is such a large part of that economy. I mean, I can't think of any agricultural, outfit that doesn't use that kind of labor on some level. And the reason is because you can underpay. You don't have to pay them as much. And because of the exchange rate of our dollars versus their dollars, we're paying them great when it comes to under their home prices. They can come up here, earn a living, then they take off and go back across the border, send money to their family or whatever, and now we have affordable food. We get to eat for pretty good prices. I mean, the whole thing is built around that. So when you have these quick policies that go out overnight and you just blow up an entire industry, no one has time to adjust. There's no strat, like as far as strategically behind it, you're going to see some real impact, right?
Yeah, I mean, and we've always relied on immigrants in agriculture. Before going back in history, it used to be they used to call it the Becero program. That was the program that initially brought over people from Mexico who worked in ag labor. The problem has been, well, it's a lot more complicated to go through the legal process to get somebody who maybe lives in Mexico, but we're doing it. I mean, like we have over 350,000, I think, workers who come in and do labor jobs legally through what we call the H-2A program. But that is it's really complicated. And if you can get a guy who's coming up and with a pickup load of guys who said, hey, we're all experienced pickers, we'll work for you for this week. Um, and who knows, you might be paying them cash or whatever. It's awfully tempting. But you also have people who have been working in dairies or other farms for maybe 25 years who have been here illegally. And they always kept thinking there was going to be this opportunity to legalize. You know, that's what happened in 1986. We gave amnesty to a bunch of people who were here illegally, and everybody since 1986 has believed it would happen again. And instead we go, no, we're not doing that. That word amnesty will cause us 10% of voters to immediately shift their voting patterns. So we're just going to go do mass deportations. Well, this is the ripple effect of a 35, 40-year broken immigration system. And look, people, when I was in high school, I worked in tobacco in the fields. And I hated doing that so much that when I graduated high school, I immediately left for the military and the army to not do that again. I decided it would be better to go to basic training in Georgia in July than work tobacco, right? Now, when I was in basic training, I thought maybe that was a stupid idea, but that was you know, you're not going to find kids, high school kids or college kids who are that willing to do a whole bunch of agricultural work unless they're riding a tractor or something, right? Um, it's not the same as,
I was going to say I had a similar experience. I became a father at a pretty young age, and I was in college at the time. And I to make ends meet, I dropped out of college, and I went and I took the first job that would take me, and it was concrete. And I worked on a crew that was building dairies. And it's, you're
wow.
starting at 5 in the morning, 4 in the morning, so that you can get your pour before the day heats up. And then by the end of the day, you're in 110 degrees and it's dusty, and we're pouring concrete in a desert field. And it took me about 8 months of that to get myself back into college and to like, I will do whatever I can to not do that again.
Yeah. I mean, so 2 months ago, before this all blew up, I was out in Arizona and California working on a labor package, working on stories about H2A. I was around Brawley, California, and I found an onion field that was being harvested, and then I found a field of there were like 60 people in this field working with the conveyors, and they were picking and boxing sweet corn right there. And I spent about a half hour or so taking photos of him. 10 a.m., it's 90 degrees. I'm like, all right, I'm done. I take my camera, I go get my air conditioned car. I'm like, but they were going to be out there. That field would have taken at least the rest of the day to finish, And like I said, it was 90 degrees at 10 a.m. And that's hard labor, It
It
just
is,
it
and you
just
would have to pay me a lot of money to do that. I mean, that's the economy of the situation, right? Is you have to get. Maybe we're wimpy. I don't know, but you would have to definitely increase wages for people that are willing to do it to get this production. And it's like from the surface, you say it, and from the outside talking heads are like, oh, well, we just need to toughen up as a country. And it's like, no, it's got a bigger problem than that.
Yeah, I mean, there was a 57, I'm 57. There was a 57-year-old man. He lives in Mexicali, Mexico, comes over to Brawley every day to work. He was moving onion crates the whole time I was watching the guys picking onions. And I talked to him just a little bit. He didn't speak very much English, but he was same age as me. I would have dropped dead after about maybe 3 hours of doing what he was doing. And he does it every single day, you know?
Yeah.
And it's just like, this is just a guy trying to make a living.
And it's this it is a widespread issue of, if we eliminate the workforce that is willing to do this work at a certain price, we're going to experience cost increases that I don't know if the market can adjust to. Quit and granted, solutions have to be found. Immigration has to be improved. We allowing mass illegal immigration into the country does present a problem, not just from a labor perspective, but from a socioeconomic perspective, right? You have a population that's not integrated to our society, that doesn't speak the language, doesn't know the culture, and you could have bad actors also in that. Like, there's a whole number of things that this needs to be fixed for, but the impact to our agricultural production is pretty huge.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a lot of bigger fruit and vegetable companies that just flat out moved their operations to Mexico,
Right, right,
and they're sending the products over from Mexico. We've had so you lose the domestic production there. If you go and if I'm a farmer and labor is just too tough. So for growing fruits and vegetables, I'm going to start growing corn or soybeans. Um, our corn and soybean guys probably would not appreciate having another 5 million acres of corn or soybeans produced every day because that would then press their prices down.
right,
If you decide that you're going to move over to growing crops that don't take much labor, that you can grow with, a few guys and a lot of tractors, that has another different ripple effect across the guys who grow wheat, the guys who grow cotton, etc. So, there's a balance that you have to have in what guys are doing. And then you know the other guys who, you know, look, you're a dairy farmer, that's what you do. You were invested in that kind of operation. You've got a lot of capital there, but you need 30, 40, 50 people maybe to run a 4,000 head dairy operation efficiently.
So one, thank you for your analysis of that. I think the what we're looking at in immigration is so big right now, and it's evolving on a daily, weekly basis. You know, it's everyone's kind of just reactive right now. I wanted to ask you sort of where things currently stand. We have the big beautiful bill in place. There's a couple provisions in the big beautiful bill that sort of address some of the hotter topics in agriculture. But we're still kind of waiting on this farm bill, and I kind of wanted to see if do you have any insight into the farm bill? Because I've been asking people, and I've been trying to get some insight, and it seems there's not a lot.
Well, the big beautiful bill is going to deal with a lot of it, you know, the big chunks anyway. Um, the biggest things in the farm bill are always nutrition policy and commodity policy, and that reconciliation bill is going to address both of those. They're making cuts to the supplemental nutrition assistance program, and that has created a lot of unpopular pushback. And they are increasing farm program payments in different ways. And depending on the commodity that you grow, it's going to be a little bit more beneficial for you than others. Part of the problem with having 85 million acres of soybeans and 90 million acres of corn is that when they spread out a policy among all of those acres, maybe the benefit might only be $5 or $6 per acre for a farmer. For the rice farmers, to maybe we only grow about 2 million acres of rice throughout the whole country. Um, that might increase their payments maybe $100 an acre. Um, so those main things are being worked out and put into the reconciliation bill. Now, what it doesn't do is it doesn't deal with farm loans like we talked about earlier. They wanted to do some things to increase the level that you can get a loan at because you know, land is more expensive. If you're a beginning farmer, maybe they need higher loans to secure some land or equipment. Um, there are other things. Rural development is not dealt with at all. Rural development is a big issue in the farm bill. You know, whether it's wastewater treatment facilities or rural electricity, rural broadband, all of these different things are funded through different sections of the Farm Bill. Rural housing loans are all part of that credit title. So there are a lot of things that won't be dealt with in this bill that they think they're going to be able to maybe come together later this year and deal with in a smaller level. But part of the problem with Congress is that when they do one thing really big during the year, they don't have a lot of oxygen to do anything else. It just seems. Um, because they spend the rest of their time fighting about the annual budget and they always pass that late, you know. So everything gets gridlocked. If they get the one big beautiful bill passed, um, that would be, you know, kind of monumental, so to speak, because it's a huge piece of legislation. But that really is going to make it, I think, even harder to get a farm bill passed for everything else because Democrats aren't going to want to help. And there just often isn't a lot of oxygen left for Congress. They're old people. A lot of them just can't absorb doing more than one
They're
thing.
old people.
They're just
There's
they
there's a lot of
can't
truth in
absorb. Yeah,
that.
you know they do one big thing in a session and they really don't get a whole lot else done
It
anymore.
takes all their concentration to get that one thing done. It
Um,
takes a lot, it takes all the brain power. And you brought up a couple really important things to understand about the Farm Bill is one, the committee is flipping huge. Like this is the amount of brains that are taken up on all the subcommittees in the Farm Bill is pretty massive. And you've got legislatures, I would say, okay, I haven't dug in all this, so this is completely out of my hind end. But I'm going to go ahead and just on a whim say a lot of them have no idea what goes on in agriculture that are on the Farm Bill. Some do. Some are very intuitive and understand agriculture. Some of them have no idea about the impacts that their proposals are going to have on agriculture. The other part of this is something that you mentioned. You were talking about the nutrition programs and stuff. The actual percentage of Farm Bill that actually deals with agriculture is actually fairly small in the Farm Bill. A lot of it is these nutrition programs and you just brought up other things like residential loans in rural areas, right? Like that kind of stuff. Water, things that you wouldn't attribute to farming. I guess water you would, but there's a lot of this stuff in there that people are arguing over that has nothing to do with how you get food out of the ground. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, we call it the Farm Bill, but it really is it's the reauthorization for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And people don't really understand or appreciate just how many different things that the U.S. Department of Agriculture does. Other things that aren't dealt with in this bill, the reconciliation bill, um, um, animal and plant disease issues. We have a lot of them. We have a growing number of them. Whether it's crop problems or right now the biggest thing going on in for Texas cattle producers is this fly in Mexico, the New World screwworm. That if that shows up in the United States, um, we risk losing export markets because of it. We risk the idea that Canada would shut its border off to some of our cattle, just like we've done with Mexico. So
yeah, we actually just interviewed the CEO of the National Cattlemen's Beef
yeah.
Association about the screwworm epidemic, and it's nasty. This is something that's going to impact all of us within the next few years.
So that's is all of these different things that the U.S. Department of Agriculture does, and that actually is just one little small piece of it. But yeah, no, nutrition is really the biggest thing. It's 42 million people are on SNAP. Then you have the school lunch program that is also USDA. Every kid in America going to a public school is fed something that is basically bought through a USDA contract. Um, so it's yes, that's about $100 billion of USDA's budget in some way, shape, or form is tied to food.
So, and when it comes down to it, you have a gridlock in the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill is not just farms. Like that's, and
Yeah,
it's hard to get around. It seems and feels like an inefficiency in process and setup in terms of how these things have just accumulated under the Farm Bill. But it's like that's another thing. Like you just can't fix that overnight. Like that's not something that you can just go in and just start hacking at. Because things have been added under that umbrella, you hack one thing and then you wreck five other things. And
yeah.
it's all become intertwined.
Well, yeah, I mean, you live in the West. The U.S. Forest Service is a U.S. Department of Agriculture agency.
Right.
I forget how many untold millions of acres that entails, but they just moved over the firefighting service to a new agency in Department of Interior. They basically shifted USDA's firefighters over to Interior. That's a big deal. That's like over 6,000 workers in some way, shape, or form moved from one department to another. And
And an
you don't realize,
unbelievable amount of logistics with
yeah,
airplanes and trucks and skydivers, right? Like you got your hot shots that
yeah. I mean,
parachute in the
it's like
flames.
a
Like,
major
yeah.
corporate merger, basically.
Yes. So, tell me a little bit about where are we sitting with, okay, tariffs, I feel like is you could close your eyes and throw a dart at a board that you can't see to get an answer about, but where are we sitting on tariffs right now? We've worked out a couple of deals. The announcement was that we worked something out with China, but now we're not friends with China again, and it seems like that's stalled.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a standoff with China where both sides have agreed I'm not going to draw first anymore. But that's about where it is. Um, in this situation, is we're going to start finding out. Generally, you. China will start making major buys of U.S. commodities. Our commodities, harvested in the fall. So they're going to start making buys generally around July, next month. And if they are not making those purchases, that's when our prices are really going to start to feel it, particularly for soybeans.
I was going to say soybeans
Um,
is the big one that we have to watch out for
yeah,
because what last time around they went to, was it Brazil or Venezuela?
Brazil
Yeah,
primarily, but also Argentina.
Argentina. Okay.
You know, and we never fully got the market share back from that because they became more invested in Brazil, but they buy from us at a particular time of year, because Brazil and the United States are perfectly rotated in our harvest, per perfectly opposite, I should say. So they buy from us in October, November, December, January, and February. Then they flip over and they start buying from China. But they lock in those contracts for purchases usually around July and August. And then they start picking up. So it can have a major effect if we don't see some sort of détente with Brazil over particularly because there's no other buyer in the world that is quite like China when it comes to particularly soybeans and pork. Another commodity that we really want to see China continue to buy strong volumes of because they're the biggest buyer of pork products in the world.
And as far as where we currently sit, have we seen any impact on our markets currently from the tariffs that were proposed, a month ago, 2 months ago?
Um, not too much, probably some in beef. But the cattle market and the beef markets have been so strong for a variety of reasons that they feel like they just kind of are overwhelming it at the moment because we have such a small cattle herd anymore. But so we haven't really seen a whole lot of impact right now. Um, right now, primarily the biggest thing that kind of is dominating live markets is weather. But in the grand scheme of things, prices are kind of holding steady. It looks like on some of these things. But we will start to find out, like I said, in about the next month or two. The closer you get to harvest is when you start seeing what are our international buyers doing. And hopefully we're also kind of coming to terms with Canada and Mexico. Canada, Mexico, and China are by far the three largest buyers of U.S. agricultural products. Everybody else is very much a step down from them. So we've got to find a way to have better relations with all three of those on some sort of trade deal. And nothing else is really going to be as good as that. We've been trying for 40 years or more to really break in heavily into India, and we've been unsuccessful for that time. So there's not going to be any big breakthrough with selling a whole bunch of commodity products to India anytime soon. We did get some sort of announcement surprise, and I think was really helpful. Um, we're going to they England, the United Kingdom agreed to buy like 700 million gallons of ethanol every year. That's pretty interesting, and that kind of increases what they were buying. So, and they agreed to buy beef, but they've had so many problems. They say, yes, we'll give you a quota for beef, but oh, we don't want anything that's raised with hormones and that sort of thing. And you use these other things. So they basically England and Europe put up a lot of barriers to buying our beef. And those are things that are not going to go away easily. It's these are long-standing fights that are going to continue.
And one interesting one about China in particular is, we have all the conversation about counter tariffs or our tariffs or what they do, and did China tariff us back? I think it was Jackson Takish that I was talking with about it over there at Farmer Mac, and he brought up that China doesn't necessarily tariff you back; they just don't buy your stuff. So you
Yeah,
find out when it comes down to purchasing time, that's when it hurts because they haven't announced a tariff; they just don't buy. And that's sort of it's sort of a power play that you don't think about when you're looking at the headlines, like, oh, this might still happen in a bad way.
That was basically what happened in 2018 was China just stopped buying our soybeans. Now, what was interesting was that we had like a 60% tariff on our pork. They put a 60% tariff on our pork at that time, but they bought a whole lot of it because they were dealing with African swine fever and they needed imports of pork. So they put a high tariff on our product, but they still bought high volumes of pork. But with soybeans, yeah, there was like several months there where they were just not buying, and that was a really stressful time for the soybean industry.
So, and I want to be respectful of your time. I could probably sit down with you all day. Seriously, like the amount of rabbit holes I could go down with you. I could take some of your time, but I want to be respectful of your time. Uh, Tell me sort of what's on the horizon news-wise that people may not be aware of or that people should be paying attention to that we haven't sort of covered.
Oh, that's a great question. What's out there that we haven't covered?
Well, I mean, what's out there that you've covered that sort of like it's, because the big ones, like we covered the big ones, but what else, what other things are on the horizon, I guess?
um, well, I think probably obviously the things about the reconciliation bill that really need to be highlighted are the tax implications for farmers, and ensuring that they're not going to get hit with some things, but also just the idea that should I buy a piece of equipment now when maybe I might be able to get 100% bonus depreciation. Now hopefully they do that. It's retroactive to the beginning of the year, but just those kind of decision making uh, things are going to be critical for us right now. What happens every year is we all start getting into crop watch mode. Um, you know, July is obviously the time of drought and extreme weather events. So we start getting into monitoring what's going on with the crops, and by the end of August, uh, you'll have people out there trying to count every single kernel of corn and soybean that might be in the fields this year. So that's probably the thing that everybody will start be paying a lot more attention to is just simply the crop conditions, and also what's the summer do to summer pasture conditions and the possibility of drought. The other things that are going on geopolitical, everybody just is kind of um, you're caught up in it, but you have to watch and see just what changes. I mean, just because of the Israel being involved in another conflict, everybody in agriculture is wondering, well, what's this going to do with fertilizer prices? You know, what's this going to do with that kind of implication? It's amazing how these geopolitical things suddenly affect something you really didn't give a whole lot of consideration to.
Yeah, and yeah, we saw that from Ukraine, how that influenced, especially barley, right? That was the big
Yeah.
one with
Well, and
Ukraine. And
fertilizer out there,
yeah.
we're not buying Russian fertilizer. Well, that's really a bad deal because they were out there and they were cheap. So now what do we got to do to make up for that? So,
Yeah. So, all right. So I mentioned your X account, but you work with Progressive Farmer, and I want to promote Progressive Farmer. Tell everybody how they can get in, subscribe, get involved with Progressive Farmer.
well, we still have the print magazine, and we're very proud that we continue to print. And you can subscribe. I'm pretty sure at progressivefarmer.com. Um, Most of if you want to see a lot of our content, you can go to dtnpf.com, and that is going to provide you with a general daily content. We have a lot for subscribers, who are very much into understanding the markets and everything else. We have a lot of paid subscribership that is, whether it's the cattle business or crops, corn, soybeans, wheat, etc. We provide a lot of daily analysis to people on how to trade, what to be looking for, a lot of weather information that is localized, stuff like that, is all kind of driven to help farmers. For like 3 or 4 years when fertilizer prices were high, I couldn't get anybody to read my stuff because the fertilizer column was the most read thing of the week, every single week for like at least 2 years. Um, and I couldn't catch a break because everybody was paying attention to fertilizer prices.
Awesome. Thank you. And I will make sure to include those links in the podcast notes. Chris, you've been more than generous with your time. I can't thank you enough for hanging out and let me pester you with questions. Again, you can follow Chris on X. We'll have a link to your profile on there because again, you do a terrific job of updating people. Again, ag policy editor for Progressive Farmer magazine. Progressive Farmer. I'm going to say Progressive Farmer. Chris Clayton, thank you very, very much.
Well, thanks for having me, Mac.
This concludes episode 142, talking to Chris Clayton, the agricultural policy editor at Progressive Farmer. Again, we covered everything in this episode. There's not many news topics that we did not cover. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, subscribe to this podcast. Find us on social media, comment on our posts about this podcast. Let us know what you think. And again, thank you very much for listening.